What is up, everybody? We're back. And like I said, at the end of the DLC, I wanted to do a tier list quickly of pretty much just the characters from Midnight Suns. I think all of them are here, including the DLC characters. Yes, I do see them. And just kind of give my opinions of the characters and their cards and everything like that. I'm really excited about doing this. Not all the characters you can see. I mean, there's most of them at the bottom, but my camera's blocking some, and there's some a little off camera. But as we move along, we'll see them come up. I think S through D is probably best bet on how we kind of want to rank all of these. But yeah, let's just get right into it. This is kind of weird because they have both dark and light hero based. But let's just start with the main protagonist, you, the character, the main character, Hunter. Hunter is S tier, and I don't know why they did a dark and a light version. Both versions and their card selections are outstanding. A lot of heals, a lot of high damage output, and yeah, I mean, it's without a doubt, Hunter is the S tier character in this game. Excuse me. There's a reason why they give you a dark path and a light path. And yeah, the cards you just play off of everything yet. So like the build that I was doing, I was a lot of doing single person damage, aerial damage with like heal based stuff. So like under the light component of Hunter, they had a heal pulse, essentially heal blast. So it would do damage to enemies, but at the same time, if your hero allies are in the radius bubble, they'll become healed. So I do a lot of damage that way, based off my AOE, and then a lot of the dark side abilities do high damage to single characters. So that was pretty cool. I'm not gonna. I mean, we could just do it dark and light just to free up some space here. But yeah, Hunter S 1000%. But let's start here right at the beginning. We've got Blade. Blade is Blade was pretty decent early on, even in late game, because Blade is heavily featured in the DLC. I started playing around with Blade a lot more to kind of get a hand of his abilities. Obviously, you want to focus on applying bleed. So I think it was like bleed him up, or I don't know, one of his ability cards. I want to say his passive ability, but what you want to do with Blade is essentially put on bleed on your opponents, so that obviously chip damage. And I didn't use Blade as much as I'd hope I would think, but yeah, I think Blade is pretty solid. I think he's pretty average. Next up, we've got Captain America. He is the best tank possibly, with his tactician ability as well as Brooklyn Handshake. A lot of single punches, Spring, which is a AoE attack that uses a shield. He is outstanding, and being able to put block on a lot of your allies was huge. But yeah, he is definitely the best tank out of all of the tanks that they have. I think Captain Marvel could be considered an offensive tank, and so would Hulk. But in my opinion, I immediately, as soon as Cap was available in game, I was using him as fast as possible. And later game, when you unlock more cards and build a pretty solid foundation, his ability to add block to characters actually proved to be probably one of the greatest assets, I think, in my opinion, on a team. So definitely 1000% best tank for sure. Captain Marvel, I found pretty good synergy with Captain Marvel with Nico, oddly enough. And later on, the abilities and cards that you get for Captain Marvel, to me, didn't work in my favor. Um, she is a tank, offensive tank for sure, and I think you can only get the most out of her in an offensive way is damage output if a enemy is targeting Captain Marvel. Um, it's one of its heroics, a free card going binary, increases obviously damage, but it also gives you a really good shield essentially. But as soon as that shield is depleted, um, it's like you lose binary, you lose your maximum output of damage, and yeah, I like I said, I got good synergy with her and Nico for some reason, and I don't know, like she was my tank. I mean, she's really the only tank, to be honest. She is the only tank until you get Cap and until you get Hulk, and Hulk isn't until like Endgame, and you kind of have to play around with how you want to utilize Captain Marvel. But for me, as I unlocked Hulk and Cap, the real Cap, Captain Marvel definitely fell in the ranks for me. And then I rarely end up using her. I end up using her for doing the intel missions, so that says a lot there as well. Doctor Strange, early on, the abilities that you have right out the gate were they were hard to maneuver. He is a support, but can be really aggressive when you stack up your heroism. A lot of his cards depend on how much heroism you have, and then your damage output is increased. But then I started figuring out a lot of his cards. Being able to put conceal actually helps a lot. He's got some cards that do that for your allies. Um, Winds of Watum. I love quick cards and knockback cards. I know a lot of people are like, well, quick cards are dumb, but I feel like if you can shuffle through a lot of quick cards, that just ends up helping me build heroism much faster, in which I can use heroic abilities sooner. Um, Plus, having quick cards, I mean, it's a automatic refund on KO, so I was able to cycle through my hands pretty quickly. I think I'm able to do that very well with Doctor Strange, and he ends up becoming one of my favorite support-esque characters later on. Um, though, obviously, when you see through my playthrough, my friendship level is literally like at 6, because I thought, he's pretty squishy. But when you start kind of figuring out a lot of his options and buffs that can help with your allies and your team, he actually is really good to use, and he's become a favorite for sure. Ghost Rider. When the game got announced, I was really looking forward to using Ghost Rider, Robbie Reyes, and I got to play him. And I gotta say, he might be my first D character, because his abilities, they aren't that great, and they also do a lot of self-inflicting damage, and it just isn't worth it. Being able to put drop points is nice, but there's nothing great. His level 3, the Hell Ride, damage output depends on how many cards you have as well. And after you use the ability, your entire hand is gone. So it's kind of a waste, to be honest. He's only good for drop points, and that's even if you use them, to be honest. You have to, synergize those with knockback abilities. Yeah, I did not like any of the card options for Robbie Reyes, unfortunately, and I had high hopes. Um, yeah, it sucks, unfortunately. Iron Man, I would probably put him in B. He's kind of teetering, to be honest, for me, B and A. I would definitely put him ahead of Blade. He's probably number one in B, regardless. Maybe even lower tier A, but we'll see when we get through the other ones. At the beginning, they were pretty self-explanatory cards that you get. Um, repulsors things, marking targets. Nothing too nothing too great, in my opinion. Later on, when I started unlocking a lot of other cards and applying modifiers, a lot of his quick cards and knockback cards had a redraw function in which it would increase damage. Those were a lot of fun. The Leave It to Me, and I think Leave It to Me doubles your heroism. One of his cards allows you to double your heroism, and that was awesome. His Hellfire Beam, essentially his Midnight Sun ability, was awesome. Direct damage in a straight line, so if you can kind of piece a lot of enemies together, it's extreme damage output in a weird way. It's not an AoE attack, but if you have things lined up, it essentially turns out to be one. But yeah, a lot of his late game stuff for me, I ended up started utilizing him more and applying specific modifiers for my playstyle, and he turned out to be kind of one of my favorites for sure in later time when I kind of start piecing things together. I'm trying to think what else Iron Man that I liked about him. Marking targets later on, especially with the high health enemies, definitely helps when you're applying double vulnerabilities to them. So a lot of fun is there as well. Magik. Magik, I want to put her in A, but is she better than Iron Man? I'm gonna put her right behind Iron Man. She doesn't have that many cards. She ends up being like the knockback queen for me. With opening portals and being able to put things into like hazards, like the magic in the ground, in the cracks, being able to shoot a portal that way and doing AoE damage that way, or even summoning a portal that would target a main enemy, was also things that I used a lot. She's got a kick, a lot of quick and knockback cards and abilities. I'm trying to think of anything. Did she have any? Did I use any of her defense? I don't think so. But like I said, knockback queen. I loved using Magik. Magik was gonna be one of the characters that I wanted to utilize the most, and I sure did. I sure did use Magik a lot. She's also got the highest friendship in my playthrough. Just because I don't know what it's about. Magik is just awesome. I like Magik as a character, as a mutant, and yeah, she was definitely one that I just loved using. Nico, I like Nico a lot too. A lot of people don't like because of her roulette. I don't want to say it's like an ability, but the modifier, the roulette modifier to all of her cards. You don't know what you get. But I think that's the point. I think that's the fun. Like, obviously, it could assign any type of debuffs to enemies and apply a lot of buffs to your heroes and your allies. And I finally found the right set that I wanted to use for Nico. And it was just, yeah, high damage output all the time. Blood Magic. I think Blood Magic was really the main card that you can use to buff and debuff. And what was the other ones? There were direct single person damage. I can't remember the card, and I don't have them up, but direct damage. I loved it so much. I think it's so much fun. I loved using Magik and Nico together as well, but they are squishy. They are pretty frail, so it's very difficult. I always needed to make sure that I would have some type of tank. So Nico, I found that with Captain Marvel, and then Captain America, I was able to kind of cycle through with everybody as well. Um, yeah, I think I think that's pretty straight explanatory. I'm putting Scarlet Witch in C because it wasn't until later on I was able to start figuring out how to properly use her. She is strictly a support character. Anything in her radius is pretty much where you kind of want to live. Um, in her AoE, she does a lot of AoE attacks, uh, and her AoE, you utilize it to buff your allies and your heroes, and then you have like Chaos Field, in which they apply debuffs to enemies, or even like, is it Chaos Field or Hex Field, one of those two, that actually do the damage in AoE perspective. So placement for Scarlet Witch is key. It is basically the only thing you really need to know about Scarlet Witch is you need to know your placement and all of that jazz, because if you don't, you're not really utilizing her best to her capabilities. So for me, unfortunately, because I couldn't figure out the best suit until way later on in game, how to use Scarlet Witch, she's probably just going to be sitting in C for me. Is she better than Captain Marvel? I'd probably say they're pretty on par with each other. But obviously, Captain Marvel, in an offensive standpoint, works the best for me. I was more of a go, 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 go type of player. Do as much damage as possible, essentially, and then use a lot of my hunter abilities to be a healer as well. So that's just my offensive style, really. Spider-Man, A. Opportunist is probably one of his best abilities, and being able to have free environmental damage is pretty spot on, especially for those that have the that require two heroism to do the environmental attack. His I don't remember what it was called. I think it might be Radiant Spider. It's Midnight Sun ability. Being able to have 3 Spider-Man cards be free is also awesome. At the beginning, it was, I wouldn't say it's too difficult. His Chain Strike and being able to combo off of KOs is also pretty handy, especially when you have swarms. That was I kind of used heavily. Bind, for me, and it wasn't until later on I hated the bind card. It was handy when you had enemies with shield, so obviously a protector to either a main target or things you had to break. So that's really the only time I utilized bind if I wanted to end this mission faster. So I didn't really like the ability. It's up here. Ability as well is actually really good too. I loved it. But going back to bind, because I keep jumping around, I didn't like bind until Venom came along, because some of his abilities also do more damage if a target is stunned or bind. So that was also really key. So having some synergy there as well is pretty cool. So Wolverine is next. I used Wolverine as much as possible because Wolverine is one of my favorite characters. But later on, he doesn't become useful anymore. He does do a lot of chain attacks. He's got some knockback. He's got rapid healing that can act, and I think rapid healing also cures you. So he gets rid of all your debuffs and heals. So that's actually really nice to have, because he can be a pseudo tank-esque because he has a healing factor, but it doesn't do too much. I forgot what his regular ability card is that allows you to do damage when you draw more Wolverine cards or then your next two Wolverine cards. That helps, but if you don't start with that card, um, you're kind of SOL because you're just doing chain attacks at the minimal output of damage, and it kind of it becomes a hindrance later on. When I start using like Morbius ends up taking Wolverine's spot for me, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But yeah, I was a little disappointed, a little disappointed. Um, Hulk, Hulk for me. You know what? I think I'm moving Iron Man up to A. I really liked using Iron Man later on because I would probably say, yeah, I'd say Hulk is at the top of B for me. It's Hulk. Uh, he's an offensive tank. Um, your main objective is to build your rage meter. The more it is, the more damage you do out later on. His Midnight Sun ability, I forgot what it was like. I think it's Earthbreaker or Gamma Breaker, some Earthbreaker, something like that. And that is probably the most amount of damage you could possibly do in an AoE attack, probably ever. Um, yeah, I would say, yeah, Hulk is pretty damn good. Like, and you have the ability to, you have a heal card essentially with Hulk. Um, you can consume your rage, and that will heal you. So if you're in a bind, you can use that card. Um, his Thunderclap is probably my least favorite card. It's a straight line of attack, but I think the damage output isn't what I think it should be. Um, he has some knockbacks. He applies stun perfectly. So if you're ever in a little bind, you can use one of his cards to apply stun. And then he has cards that do more damage if the target has stun applied. So there's some finessing you can do, but I liked using Hulk. It sucks you don't get him till way later in the game. Um, and if you got access to him early on, um, you'd be flying through the game, and I think that's probably why they did it that way. All right, we are up to the DLC characters. We're about 20 minutes in. I think we're pretty much right on schedule. Pretty excited about that. But first up, DLC was Deadpool. I'm sorry, I love Deadpool, but I think his card selection just wasn't doing it for me. He is a solo character. He only benefits himself. There isn't really a team synergy with him. He has an all together now card, but that's it. His damage output really heavily relies on the Enfuego meter, and you can only do that when you're doing damage, and you lose your meter if you take damage. So, especially for the DLC with the vampires, if they have frenzy and they end up attacking you, you're kind of screwed. So I wish I could say more about Deadpool, but unfortunately, he's the weakest. He is the weakest of the four, essentially. Venom, you want to build your Ravenous meter. Obviously, that has some good output to your damage. Insatiable Hunger is something you want to use and want to modify because it becomes a free card. It will not use Ravenous. It will increase your Ravenous meter. Because when you do damage, your Ravenous goes down. And the more Ravenous you have, the more damage you can do. So there are just so many of his cards that I loved. He had a Web Throw, a Spike Burst. He does have a Chain card that I left in, but didn't do too much. It's very, when you're doing chain strikes, your output is always going to be like 80 to 90 damage. He's got life steal cards that became really, really handy for me. He isn't a tank. I mean, he could be, but he is high octane offensive damage and life stealing as well. Morbius. Morbius is by far one of my favorite characters that I end up loving. Bloodlust, applying bleed. So him and Blade have the best synergy together because you're applying bleed and then you're capitalizing on damage of bleed for certain cards. So if a person had bleed, it increases the damage. It like doubles. So I used Morbius. I can just fly through his cards. He's got a really good conceal card. Oh, I just loved every ounce of Morbius. And to be quite frank, I did not think. I was like, oh, Morbius makes sense to be in the story. Do I think I'm going to utilize him at all? I pretty much used Morbius all the way through end game, late game, DLC. He was on my team. I loved using Morbius. He's got a lot of great quick cards. He's got a good knockback, bleed effects, echolocation card that applies like a weaken and a bleed automatically. Him and Blade do have, if like I said, if their target is bleeding, you increase damage. His mist form, awesome. Bloodlust, also fantastic. I started applying modifiers to some of his cards in which I would gain a counter. Him having a counter is also is a really good necessity to have on Morbius. But I loved playing with Morbius. One of my favorites. And then Storm. So obviously we saw. I'm gonna put Storm at B for now as I talk about her. As you may have seen, our latest playthrough is playing through Storm's story. She is a AoE attacker, and she has this modifier called Next Turn. I keep calling the modifier. I don't know if you want to call him that. But her modifier is called Next Turn, and Next Turn increases damage. Now, when I originally first saw that, and I was like, this is dumb, like, because I feel like I'm having to obviously keep my cards until next turn to kind of quantify its damage and its output, and at that point it's like, is it really necessary? There's some cards that really do require that damage output, but if you got Goddess Blessing, it activates all your next turn cards immediately. So you really only want to use that, to be honest, when you have a lot of Storm cards in your hand. Now, as I play through, and I've got Hunter and whatever other character alongside Storm, next turn, I actually found myself actually holding on to cards. Like, I didn't mind holding on to them. The only problem that I really ran into with Storm, if all of my other cards were heroic abilities and I had no heroism. That's really the only like blocker and fault that I found with using Storm and the next turn ability. Obviously you can use them, but if you wait, you can kind of get a nice perk of it. So yeah, I didn't mind it at all. So Storm is actually also a lot of fun to play as well. Let's see if I want to finagle and move some people around. I don't think there's anyone that is S tier alongside Hunter because you have so many options with her and you don't get that with anybody else. A tier, I would even put Morbius ahead of Iron Man. Shit, I even put it ahead of Spider-Man, to be honest. That's how much I actually really enjoyed playing Morbius. B, Hulk, Venom at the top makes sense. Knockback Queen, Nico with the roulette, Blade. I definitely would put Storm. Actually, I'd put Storm ahead of Blade and Wolverine. I leave them as that. Yeah, I leave those as is. But yeah, I really enjoyed playing Midnight Suns. I liked it being a turn-based RPG type style game. I had so much fun. I really hope you guys really enjoyed me playing through that as well. And they're teasing so much as for a secondary game if they choose to, with Doom Endgame as well as Sin in the DLC. Is Dracula going to come back? There's still that open door of Mephisto as well. Will we ever get a follow-up of that? But yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. Hopefully I can get some feedback from you guys if you played the game. Tell me how you rank your characters and how they turned out and how they played, because I'm also very interested in your guys' play style as well. So if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like it. Be sure to comment on it, on your ideas and your opinions. I would love to hear them on the game and on the characters themselves. And if you wanted other characters, who do you also want to incorporate? Because I think there is really good potential. There are so many other characters that you can actually grow this franchise with. And I'll see you guys next time. Peace.